A man took his wife to Paris for their honeymoon. They wandered into an antique shop by chance. An old leather briefcase on a shelf caught his eye. He took it down to take a look. The weathering of time gave the briefcase a sense of history. Seeing how much he loved it, his wife decided to buy it for him as a gift. Little did they know, this seemingly worn-out briefcase would completely change the course of their lives. Rory was a struggling writer. To pursue his dream of becoming an author, he and his wife moved to New York City, hoping that one day his work would be a breakout success and lift them out of their poverty. He wrote day and night to make it happen. He sent his manuscript to every publisher he could find, but all he ever got back were rejection or notes saying they weren't interested. Even so, he never gave up on his dream. Fortunately, his wife stayed by his side, quietly supporting him through it all. With no steady income to pay the rent, Rory was forced to ask his father for help, but his father told him this was the last time. He wanted Rory to find a stable job that could actually support a living. That was what a man was supposed to do. His father's words weighed heavily on him. Eventually, he faced reality. To make ends meet, he found a job in New York at one of the biggest publishing houses, hoping to make some connections in the industry. One day, he finally got the call he had been waiting for. An editor loved his work, but due to the tough market and a lack of funds, Rory's spark of hope was instantly extinguished. Rory had spent 3 years on that book, only to end up with nothing. It was a crushing blow. That night, out at dinner with friends, a friend's casual bragging cut Rory to the core. Finally, the pent-up frustration became too much to bear, and he stormed out. His wife chased after him immediately. He felt his life had veered off track, and the gap between him and his peers was widening, as if they weren't even in the same league anymore. He was trying so hard to turn things around, to give his wife a better life, but reality beat him down, time and time again. That night, after clearing his head, he apologized to her. She understood the turmoil he was going through, and didn't hold it against him. She knew how much Rory had struggled over the years, so she just stayed by his side, comforting him in silence. Late that night, Rory fell into deep thought, looking at the work he had poured his heart and soul into, realizing it was worthless. In despair, he tossed it into the trash. Though he was filled with bitter resignation, he had no choice but to bow to cruel reality. The next day, he resolved to focus on his current job, but then he noticed something in the compartment of his briefcase, a hidden manuscript. From the cover, he could tell it was a manuscript from a bygone era. He carefully began to read it. The brilliant writing and the exquisite storytelling captivated him instantly. It took him a few days to finish reading the entire story. It was one of the most powerful novels he had ever read. In the days that followed, Rory was like a man possessed. Even in his sleep, the words of the manuscript haunted him. Every word, every phrase formed vivid images in his mind, keeping him awake at night. Finally, he couldn't hold back any longer. After doing some research, he discovered that the manuscript had never been published, so he took the text and typed it into his computer, word for word. His wife happened to stumble upon the novel he had typed out. It moved her to tears. Facing his wife's overwhelming excitement, Rory couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. On the way to the office, he wrestled with whether he should actually do it. Perhaps taking this gamble was the only way to change his desperate situation. Between his struggling reality and the risk of moral condemnation, he ultimately chose the latter. He handed the manuscript to his boss, simply asking for his honest opinion, and then left the office. Many days passed after that. Rory's anticipation began to fade with each day of waiting, until it was nearly gone. It had been so long, he almost forgot about the book entirely. Then one day, thinking his boss just had a new assignment for him, he finally received the news he'd been waiting for. Relying on this stolen work, Rory finally achieved his dream of becoming a writer. He quickly signed a contract with a publisher. Upon publication, the book received unanimous acclaim. He became the darling of the New York literary scene, and even won the American Literature Award, an honor writers spend their entire lives chasing. Along with his rising fame, came a natural improvement in his quality of life. He had vaulted into the ranks of the successful. His wife's years of support were finally rewarded, but just as they were basking in the wealth brought to them by the manuscript and the boundless glory, the story's true author showed up, holding a newspaper. The old man had been waiting for Rory outside the office building. He bided his time, then followed him all the way to the park. Rory sat quietly on a bench reading. The old man sat down on the bench beside him and nonchalantly started feeding the pigeon. The old man pretended to make small talk, then steered the conversation to another, relatively obscure book, but he didn't mention the manuscript he had written himself. Rory gathered from their chat that this man was a veteran writer. Rory didn't display the arrogance of a famous author, but listened patiently to the old man's story, because he knew deep down exactly where his current honors came from. Then, the the old man mentioned. He said he had another fascinating story to tell, one he thought Rory would really appreciate. He wanted Rory to be the one to write it. He promised that this story would take his fame to a whole new level, but Rory didn't take him seriously at all. If such a great opportunity existed, why would he just hand it over for nothing? He stood up, ready to walk away, but then he heard something. Rory froze where he stood. He realized that the novel was actually written by the old man in front of him. He sat back down beside the old man and began to listen to his story. It was 1944. As a soldier, he had been stationed in Paris, but he was assigned to the most menial task. The brutal working environment left him seeing no hope for the future. Inspired by a fellow soldier, he began to fall in love with reading. It was the only place he could find joy in life. Then one day, a girl suddenly burst into his world, into his dark and dull existence. She brought a ray of sunshine. Even though they couldn't speak each other's language, nothing could stop two passionate hearts from coming together. They quickly fell deeply in love, becoming inseparable. In the young man's life, she left a beautiful memory he would never forget. Soon, his service came to an end. The young man was transferred to another city, and just like that, they were forced apart. He returned to his original, dry and monotonous life. Because communication was so scarce back then, they lost contact with one another. He could only rely on his note to relive the sweetness of their past, and gradually, he began trying to write. A few years later, the young man had become a writer with a bit of local fame. So, he traveled back to Paris, and he reunited with his girlfriend to ensure they could be together forever. He found a job at a newspaper in Paris, working as a writer. They soon walked down the aisle. Shortly after, their baby was born. The three of them lived happily together. That was the happiest time of the man's life, his most beautiful days. After marriage, the man gradually shifted his focus to writing. His initial passion and enthusiasm were slowly worn down by life. He was desperate for his work to bear fruit. But just then, their daughter fell gravely ill and left this world forever. His wife fell into a deep depression, like a hollow shell with the soul sucked out. The man didn't know how to comfort her. Instead, feeling ignored by her silence, he lashed out in frustration. He stormed out of the house and drowned his sorrows in alcohol. When he finally returned home, he found a letter saying she had gone back to her parents. At that moment, he realized his mistake, but it was too late. The death of his daughter, the departure of his wife, the double blow crushed him. He began to hammer his longing for them into the page. Unexpectedly, inspiration burst forth. The words poured out of him. He wrote day and night for weeks, finally completing the masterpiece of his life. He went immediately to find his wife, intending to bring her back to Paris, but she hadn't yet recovered from the pain of losing their daughter. She rejected him and told him to go back alone. Before leaving, the man left the manuscript with her, hoping she would understand his heart. Only after reading it did she realize it captured every detail of their life together. It made her see hope for their future again. A few weeks later, she took a train back to Paris. But after getting off, she realized she had left his briefcase on the train. Before they could even start their new life, he opened her travel bag and couldn't find his briefcase anywhere. That was likely the greatest work he would ever create. He blamed his wife for losing it. They got into a heated argument. He ran frantically back to the train station to search. He kept stopping strangers to ask if they'd seen his briefcase. His wife just stood there, watching him in silence. She felt guilty about the lost manuscript, but she also started to question her husband. Was this manuscript really more important than she was? Disappointed, he walked away, and he never returned to Paris. After hearing the full story, Rory could feel the regret behind the old man's decision, and how, for all these years, he had been living in deep remorse. He could now more viscerally understand the sorrow embedded in those pages. As for his own theft of the work, he felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. The old man didn't seek revenge for the infringement. Instead, he seemed resigned to let Rory keep the credit. This only made Rory feel even more ashamed. He sat alone on a bench for a long time, lost in thought. Then he drank himself into a stupor on the street. That evening, he stumbled home drunk. His wife was preparing dinner, happily lost in the excitement of their upcoming move. Suddenly, he asked her a question. He knew how hard it had been for her to stand by him all these years. He didn't want to hide the truth, or deceive the woman he loved into living with a lie. Finally, he decided to confess everything. Rory told his wife where the manuscript really came from, and how he had stolen the story. She couldn't believe it. Her husband seemed like a complete stranger to her now. All this time, she had trusted Rory's character. She believed in the man he was. She believed in his talent, and that time would eventually prove his worth. That was the reason she had always stood silently by his side. But now, blinded by ambition and greed, he had actually committed such a moral betrayal. Rory went to his publisher and told him the truth. truth. He begged him to remove his name from the novel and credit the old man instead, but the publisher didn't accept this proposal. He didn't want to be dragged down by Paul and have the novel sales suffer as a result. He came up with a plan for Paul. The publisher couldn't care less whether the manuscript was plagiarized. He only knew that if this scandal came to light, the publishing house would be implicated too. This matter haunted Paul constantly, severely impacting his daily life. His guilty conscience pushed him to the verge of a breakdown. His wife hoped he would make the right decision. Paul drove to where the old man lived. He wanted to use money to atone for his mistake, but after everything he had been through, the old man had long since let go of worldly fame. Money couldn't buy back what he had experienced. Paul's inner guilt and moral torment were exactly the revenge the old man intended, and the punishment for stealing another man's work. In that moment, Paul finally understood. That manuscript was the old man's deep tribute to his wife, a solace for that lost romance. The old man saw in Paul's eyes that he had realized the error of his ways. His anger subsided significantly. Finally, he called Paul to his side. Actually, the story he told last time wasn't the whole truth. A few years after his wife left, he still couldn't let go of her, so he decided to go to her city to find her. But the sight that greeted him was unforgettable. His wife had already built a new family and had a lovely daughter. He could see from her face that she was happy now. In the end, the old man didn't disturb them, but chose to walk away quietly. By now, the old man had made peace with everything, and he forgave Paul for what he had done. After leaving the old man, Paul sat alone on a park bench, thinking for a long time. Finally, he revealed the truth to the public through the media. Because of this, he lost everything he had, but he gained inner peace and was no longer tormented. His wife also forgave him, and they returned to their peaceful life. A few months later, the old man passed away. Paul handled the funeral arrangements for the solitary old man. In the end, he brought the old man's manuscript and returned it to him, intact. He buried his guilt right there, along with the earth. That is simply how life works. You strive desperately for something, face endless setbacks, and endure so much. But when it finally falls into your lap, you find no joy. Ultimately, for a success you didn't earn, you must wear the chain. We all make choices in this life, but living with those choices, that is the hardest part of all.